Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you for having me here. It's great to see some familiar faces here. I'm here to sort of set the stage on what I've been working on for literally decades. And I believe that we are looking at the interaction of AI and humanity far too superficially and without understanding enough about unconscious psychology, which is part of my background in both AI and cognitive science, and the interactions between that and social psychology. And I think that there are existential challenges here that the popular narratives of Hollywood and the politicians aren't really, talking about at the depth that we need to do. So I literally started work on AI research 40 years ago in 1984 of all years, and went on to take my training, which actually I worked on one of the first PhD theses to argue for neural nets, machine learning, statistical pattern recognition as approaches for natural language processing. And then upon graduation, turned to applying that to the task of getting them to learn how to translate, and built the first online language translators that spawned Google Translate, Yahoo Translate, Microsoft Translate, and so forth. These are things that I was honored for in the field of natural language processing about a dozen years ago. But shortly thereafter, about 10 years ago, I became very worried about the way that the same natural language processing, machine learning technologies that folks like me helped pioneer and applied to things like Google Translate in order to get different groups of people, different tribes, different cultures, different subcultures to better understand each other and to help them to relate to each other. Instead, those technologies getting applied in social media and recommendation engines and search engine results and newsfeed algorithms and now chatbots in ways that are having the polar opposite effect of actually driving each side not to understand each other, to lead toward increased polarization, both domestically and geopolitically, sliding towards demonization, sliding towards dehumanization. And I began a decade of work on that. Because of that, Google named me one of their 8 inaugural members of their AI Ethics Council worldwide the year before COVID. And now I'm in my 5th year serving on the board of TFS, which amongst other things, has been most active in drafting and reviewing the European Union's new AI Act. This all has led to a book that is going to be one of the top titles coming this spring, May 13th, from MIT Press via Penguin Random House. That is just the first part of the project to change the conversation nationally, internationally, to focus more on the actual existential challenges towards society, towards humanity, that I think we need to be getting ahead of. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about this. This is, as you see, they put it up for pre-order before we decided on the cover. This is almost the finalized cover, but it's going to undergo a few tweaks. Now, we're hearing a lot today about existential risks. People are talking about AIs wanting to take over and destroy humanity. I think this is really distracting because the problem is not immediately that. The problem is that humanity is going to destroy humanity even before AI gets a chance to do that. And that is largely because we are being unconsciously influenced really heavily, one might say manipulated, by the AIs that power the decisions hundreds of times a day on all of our devices as to what we see and what we don't see. And that is actually driving our unconscious cognitive biases. It's hardening and amplifying fear, misinformation, hate, polarization. At the same time, and this is the part where, sort of we need to understand, because oftentimes people will say, oh, well, humanity's always been like that. And it's true. And we've somehow muddled on and managed to survive all the catastrophes. But what has changed now in the era of AI in the 21st century, AI is also commoditizing weapons of mass destruction. This is something that a million years of evolution have never prepared humanity for. We've never been faced with selection pressures like this before. AI is putting into the hands now of anybody who wants drone warfare, satellite targeting, hypersonic missiles, cyber warfare, pinpoint biometric surveillance. The RAND Institute has a report this year on how AI is making a living room technology out of genetic biowarfare. Things like CRISPR that used to be $1 billion project in the 90s, now a living room technology. And so what is happening is that we're seeing this toxic cocktail, this toxic combination simultaneously of AIs working at mostly the unconscious level to drive entire populations to believe that the other side is, whoever the other side is evil, needs to be destroyed before they destroy us, and so forth, and dehumanized because evolution has created a situation where dehumanization is the way that you can have members of one tribe kill the members of another tribe without remorse, right? And so we have AI unconsciously driving populations all over toward that mindset, while also offering weapons that we've never had to anybody who wants them. And the question is, would you take a bet that not a single person is going to hit their launch button? That would be a very bad bet. Remember, before World War II broke out, we didn't even have an atom bomb yet, much less these democratized, commoditized weapons of mass destruction. And so without a radical culture change, humanity is going to destroy humanity before AI even gets a chance to do so. Let me tell you a little bit more about this. This is a hint from the book, which is chock full of new ideas people aren't thinking about. Some of you may have heard how there's 3 kinds of information disorder. There's misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And this has been repeated for the last 7, 8 years, everywhere from the Council of Europe, OECD, Scientific American, all the way up to the United Nations. People just have been blindly repeating this and drawing graphics in slight different variations. If you Google this, it's all over the internet. Why is everybody just repeating this without thinking about it? Well, because the rule of threes is one of our unconscious cognitive biases. You've probably heard it in your PowerPoint presentation classes, right? Always have 3 bullets. Because unconsciously people assign greater credibility when you have 3 things at a time. But let's think about this for a moment. What is actually the difference between these? So misinformation and disinformation are both false information. But the difference is only that disinformation is being spread by someone that we label a bad actor, and is causing what we perceive to be harm to ourselves. Whereas misinformation is being shared. It might be causing harm, but it's not by someone we label as a bad actor. It could be my, Uncle Mike. I don't really have an Uncle Mike, but everybody has one, right? Now, then the other difference is malinformation, which differs from disinformation only in that, so it's still being shared by someone we call a bad actor who is, trying to cause harm to us, but it is by giving things that are true as far as they go. They are not absolute falsehoods. So fact checking doesn't catch it. But what they leave out is crucial context. And that crucial context causes us to misinterpret, because we plug in the missing context with our own cognitive biases, our confirmation biases, our fundamental attribution errors, our Dunning-Kruger effects, and so on. Now, if you think about that, in fact, there are 2 different dimensions going on, which is a 2x2 grid. And so while everybody goes around repeating that there's only 3 kinds of information disorder, there's a missing quadrant there that is 99% of the problem. That until my book and my most recent TEDx talk a couple months ago, nobody had even named. And that's a huge problem, because it's what we don't know. That A, we don't know, because we only know what we do know. We don't know what we don't know. And it's what we don't know that's going to hurt us. So I call this neg information. And neg information is partial truths from which selective context has been omitted, crucial things that would help you correctly interpret the partial truth. But it's being spread by my Uncle Mike. And that is 99% of the information disorder problem out there. It's by far the most dangerous, insidious form of information disorder. But until the book and my talk, it didn't even have a name. People are paying no attention to that, and that's really dangerous because partial truths are even more misleading than outright falsehoods. They're much more believable. They have a ring of truthiness. They're not easily filtered out by fact checking, and they help us to confirm all our confirmation biases. Hundreds of times a day, the AI algorithms behind your social media feeds, your news feeds, your chatbot responses, your recommendations, your search results, they're not deciding just what 20 or 50 things you see on your device. They are also deciding what trillions of items you're not seeing today. I call this algorithmic censorship because we've empowered the AI algorithms to decide what we are never going to see. And we never know what they've hidden from our sight. Now, the knee-jerk reaction might be, oh, we can't have algorithmic censorship, let's ban that. But the fact is we have no choice but to empower AI algorithms to decide what they're going to hide from us because none of us can possibly read trillions of items every day. None of us has the bandwidth to read the billions of new posts on the internet every day. And so the real question that we have not been asking, we keep sweeping under the rug, but that is existential for society and for democracy. The real question we have to keep out and to stop sweeping under the rug is, what criteria should our AI algorithms, our algorithmic censors, be using when they decide what to hide from us, what to never show us? And I can take you through an example of that. So in recent talks, I did this in Hollywood a couple of months ago. They set up the keynote stages as boxing rings. I was surrounded 360 degrees by the audience. And I asked them, okay, here's an example of what I mean by algorithmic censorship. How many times a day do the algorithms in your social media, news feeds, recommended, et cetera, send you something that somehow mentions China? People are like, oh God, a lot, a dozen, 2 dozen. Some news junkie goes 100 times. I go, okay, great. And based on that, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong an opinion would you say you have formed? Said, oh, really strong, like 7, 8, 9. Said, okay, so let's talk about the problems in China because I've had this unusual situation where because of my joint appointment at Berkeley and at Hong Kong UST, I've been bouncing back and forth for 30 years across the Pacific every week almost and seeing the problems up close. I don't get involved, but I observe really closely. So let's talk about the problems in China. To begin with, which of the current Chinese government leaders besides Xi Jinping do you know? Absolute silence. And let me tell you, the president of McClatchy newspapers until recently was in the audience. And so that's interesting. Okay, so, well, tell me at a 3rd grade level, like at a Sesame Street level, how is the government in China actually organized? And notice, I'm not talking about parties. So like as an American, I would say, not talk about the Republicans or the Democratic parties. I would say we have a presidential election every 4 years. There is something called an electoral college. Congress is the House and the Senate. Supreme Court's at the top of the judicial system. We have 50 states, just at that Sesame Street level where we sing songs about it as a kid. Right? How would you describe how the system is administratively organized in China? Absolute silence. I think one guy in the back of the room goes, there's an emperor? And I'm like, okay, so this is interesting. Does any of you here think that this information is not available on the internet? And they go, no, it's got to be on the internet. And said, yes, in fact, it is. This information is there in spades if you look for it. So let me get this straight. The same algorithms, the same AIs that are deciding every day to bombard us with stuff about China, causing us to form strong opinions, are also deciding to never show us any of the large amount of information on the internet that would enable us to have a conversation about the problems in China at a 3rd grade level of meaningfulness. for what most people are saying is probably the most important geopolitical relationship not to mess up in the 21st century. That is what I call algorithmic censorship. And, that's really dangerous. And I could have picked any number of scenarios, but I have been bouncing back and forth across the Pacific for several decades. So that's the problem, because then how does the voting base make the right decisions? How do the candidates that run for election, who are speaking to what the general public's opinions are, that's what they're going to frame it to, right? So how do we like sort of fix this problem? And the first step is to even recognize this problem, right? We need to drive a complete shift in the conversation in the general public so that we understand these problems and we start asking the existential questions for the 21st century. And these are problems that we need to approach at the same level of depth that our founding fathers 250 years ago approached them, in a day long before the mass publishing industry, long before the internet, long before AI. Things have changed so much now, evolutionarily, that we need to have that conversation at that level of depth now. All the checks and balances and so forth necessary in an AI age.
What do you mean by 360?
So,
I like 360.
I didn't do this for us. This has been here for a while. But 360 degrees here is the first half. Number one, number two, and number three are about catalyzing, provoking a complete shift in the public conversation away from the Hollywood and politician narratives towards these existentially crucial questions. What are the criteria by which algorithmic censors should be making their decisions about what to never show us, what to hide us from us? Because I have learned, many of you may resonate with this, that even though I've been working with the think tanks and the regulators for like the better part of a decade now, you can't move politicians until the public is there. And so we need to shift the public conversation, public opinion, and then the politicians, the regulators, the think tanks will come there. And I've done this before. I can tell you about this separately, but like I've had experience doing this before. Once we have that, then we will produce the white papers and so forth that I can take, summarizing what is the public, what kind of consensus is the public coming to after we provoke those conversations. And again, I can give you examples in the discussion about what kinds of questions those would be. And in a non-political way, we can bring those to the think tanks, to the regulators, and to the responsible AI and trust and safety teams at the actual tech companies, which again, I've been working with their teams for the better part of a decade. So they all know me, but right now we have to produce that public opinion shift, the media shift, in order to bring those things front and center so that they feel like they can do something about this without being partisan. Most of the tech companies...
Do you think this is big tech? Some of the tech companies that the people on this call are investing in, or they may be in Google too, but they're not influencing Google. But can other tech companies play a role in this change?
They certainly can. Yes, in fact, we already have tech companies all the way down to sort of Series A level who are getting back behind this and actually becoming patrons of this movement, because they understand that we are all in this together, and there is a groundswell that is needed so that the tech companies, because look, the tech companies themselves mostly actually have asked for regulation on this, because every time they have to make the decision for themselves, they get absolutely plastered with criticism from all ends of the political spectrum, right? And they're like, we're not elected officials, but you're putting the power to decide what the criteria for algorithmic censorship is, in fact, right? Which we don't want. We want you to give us a level playing field for competing with sensible guidelines. And that's going to have to come from public consensus. It cannot come before the public has a realistic conversation about this.
So if I could pause this, because I know we could just go on this for hours, and you're not finished, I know, but we need to, just mindful, this current discussion. We're going to transition soon to some of the funds and their perspectives on both this as well as the opportunities in the meantime, and then come back where we're going to have either main room. We'll probably stick with you, and we'll have a continued dialogue. You want to have like a wrap up comment before we're going to ultimately circle back to you, but I don't want to cut you off completely.
So I think I've given the ball. So
Okay.
We're seeking founding patrons to support this communications and messaging campaign. The book is just a tool. It's not that I don't need another publication. I have so many hundreds already. It's a tool to help change the public conversation. And so we are just this month planning it because the book is now in typesetting as of 2 weeks ago. And so we are looking for some patrons to help with this. It does require 360-degree action, and we are prepared to do the execution, but I'm the last of my peer group, practically, to not take the giant offers from Google, from Meta, from Amazon, et cetera. And so this is why we are asking for help on this. That is the call to action. Just in the last several weeks, some charter patrons are coming in, and those who come in time, before I have to approve the typeset version of the book, November 6th, are being gratefully recognized in the book itself, which everybody who's seen the book believes is going to be a blockbuster.
Great. And then I think books are so like 1800, 1700, 1600. This is much more liquid. We talk about fluidity and liquidity today. It's going to be more subscription interactive.
Yep.
But let me pause on that. Thank you for setting the stage that democracy is completely in peril, and society could change in many directions. And then how do we invest in this climate? And Maria, if you don't mind, hold the questions to the end. And Sanjeev, I don't know if you got a sequence, but Senator was here earlier in the prep call, and I know that we've got other friends here from C10. And do you want to take over the questions from here, Sanjeev? Let everybody introduce themselves and answer a few questions.
Yeah, sounds good. So we have a few people who are, so this is in a panel format. We have Senator, we have Shahid Azim, and we have two other folks who are joining, Ashkan and Neda, who introduced themselves before. Am I missing somebody else?
I think well, Maisie from Singapore, but she told us, she reminded us that it's after midnight. So
yeah, okay. So we have this group here. I'd like to start with Shahid, then Ashkan, then Senator, and then Neda to introduce, give maybe a 90-second introduction of themselves.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Can you? Okay, perfect. So my name is Shahid Azim. I lead C10 Labs. It's an AI fund and a studio. We invest and create AI-based companies. Our thesis is essentially revolving around finding amazing talent and really investing first money into big ideas from the Cambridge ecosystem. We've been around for a year. We're in the process of closing out our first fund and have already made over 20 investments over the last year. We do this through a couple of different ways. One, we run a cohort program, and then secondly, we also incubate our own internal ventures. So Sanjeev, you said 90 seconds or so, right? So I'll keep it brief for now and pass it back to you.
Perfect, thank you. Ashkan?
Sure, thanks, Sanjeev. Ashkan Afshin, physician by training. I was always passionate about having a greater impact. So after medical school, I transitioned to public health. I got a couple of PhDs at Harvard, focus on basically on how we can prevent disease at the population level. When University of Washington, where joined a group funded by with the $600 million from the Gates Foundation, focus on estimating disease at the population level. I use a lot AI to characterize people's behavior, physical activity, diet, everything related to that. Until I realized that essentially we cannot change the policies. Policy making is a political process, not a scientific process. I used to be one of the most highly cited scientists. 2019, I stepped down from my academic position and wanted to have a real impact in life rather than have an impact factor just. So established a company in the space of cancer diagnostic. When it comes to disease prevention, which is essentially the core of a healthcare, is for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, we all know that with lifestyle modification, we can prevent it. But when it goes to cancer, the only way to do it is essentially early detection. And everything that is out there, mostly in our space, blood test using a genomic test, which is not sensitive and expensive. So we're looking what's the next big thing in this space. We find that the combination of proteins and AI-enabled diagnostic can get us where we want to do. So over the last few years, we developed a test for early detection of 18 cancer. We can show that essentially we can identify 18 cancer at a stage 1 with 90% sensitivity. We published the result, got a lot of media attention, LabCorp, Quest, everyone is interested. They join our syndicate. And we also recently worked with the David Baker Lab, the Nobel laureate for this year, to take it to the next level, to develop a home-based test under $100 to identify 30 cancer at the stage 1 with 90% sensitivity. So pleasure to meet you all.
A little bit more than 90 seconds, but we'll let you pass on that. Jennifer, your turn.
Harvard, though. So
Mine will be under Sanjeev. I'm Jennifer Mendoza. I'm a co-founder and GP at Mendoza Ventures. We're on our third fund. We started investing in AI in 2016. This fund is a $100 million fund anchored by 3 institutional banks in the US, actually down the street from where you are, Mark. I also sit on the Nothing Short in Washington. So I sit on the National Advisory Committee for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, advising Secretary Raimondo, the White House, and a few other organizations in Washington on what it's like to be an entrepreneur in the US and how to implement policy that's entrepreneur friendly. So the first iteration of that was the Tech Hubs portion of the CHIPS Act, which someone was talking about clean tech before. I'd love to connect with them on all that. And the second one was the National Entrepreneurship Strategy. So we've deployed over the years to AI with evolving thesis. I love everything that Dekai said on this front. It's certainly warnings that we've all heard before. And I would say I'm a good balance to this group usually because Mark loves to bring in the Harvard guys and I went to UMass. So I have a strong bias towards execution and action, which is always a good balance to the Boston crew.
yeah, speaking of balance, your husband's a bit of a balance with you, and he was on the panel with Dekai because you also have a philanthropy side of the house, which plays in a way to what some of the themes that Dekai was mentioning. So, but so far we have a lot of Boston in the house here.
Because we're the best, Mark.
Apparently. Okay, back to you, Sanjeev.
Yes, I'm not sure if Neda has rejoined back. She looks like she has.
Yep.
So Neda, please introduce yourself, about 90 seconds.
Hi, I'm back. Yes. So I just shared that I am representing Isono Health. I'm the CEO of the company. Is it personal introduction?
No, it's anything you want it to be.
Okay. So the way we are using, maybe I can talk to you about what we've done with the product. Isono Health has used the AI product to take ultrasound to the next level for early cancer detection. We pick up what mammography misses at a point of care, and our robotics has made it much easier without the need for a sonographer to acquire high quality image at a point of care. I can share on more. Sorry for going in and out, so I don't know the context.
Oh, this is the beginning of the panel. You're just giving an introduction about all the panelists just give an introduction. You were the last one.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Back to you, Sanjeev. Do you have a question for the panel?
I do. My question. I have many questions. I can fill the whole time with my questions. So I'll start one simple one, which is, I wanted to get everybody's opinion on what Professor Dekai said as to what are your reactions to what was said there. And Neda, if you probably get what this is about, it's about democracy and how AI has can affect that. But probably offline we can discuss that a little bit more. But would love to get your thoughts on it, and we'll start with Jennifer.
I love that we're having these conversations in the US, and it's, I think especially those of us on the call, I think it's important to remember that we're at the cutting edge of technology, and that the rest of the population is about where we were 20 years ago. And if you ever need like a good reminder of this, it's good to spend some time with your parents or some of the older people in your life and see how they're interacting with AI. I think that, to everything that Dekai said, how I see it being received from a legislative standpoint and a regulatory standpoint is that I think a lot about when Napoleon went to war, and he won war by fighting during tea time because he just disrupted the established rules of play. And that is 1000% what AI is doing. So while I love that we are having these deep conversations in the US about the ethics of the future of AI, internationally, the cat's already out of the bag, and other world powers have been training AI on populations with no consent for years. And so that's what we're up against. And so I do generally have a strong bias towards action. And I think that we need to deeply consider these conversations as we continue, but at the same time, not have them at the cost of continuing to develop competitive product.
Thank you. Shahid, I know that C10 has been talking about the IQ of AI going up. So as you respond to this question, please introduce that concept as well.
Yeah, Sanjeev, thanks for that. So certainly, I think there's some important questions getting raised, and they're important, and they need to be in the sort of the mainstream discourse. I mean, and certainly, just so people know where we're coming in from like applied AI world, where it's one of many tools, certainly perhaps the most powerful, most impactful technology humanity is going to come across for quite some time. And so certainly the scale of the impact and the stakes are very high. But at the end of the day, and to Dekai's point, like there are some very core elements of this technology that are very different, right? In terms of the potential scale, the exponential scale, which is very different from how we've all sort of evolved, right? Like we tend to think very linearly and respond very linearly. So we're facing a technology that is moving at a very different plane. And so that's the context. But what we're also seeing, or perhaps our view, is that it's important to have those dialogues, but the way perhaps to address these concerns is not through regulation, but it's really through innovation, right? And what I mean by that is that one of the key challenges with large language models and a lot of massive infrastructure investments is like, all the big tech right now, if you look at what's happening, they're investing in energy. They're investing in nuclear power because we simply don't have enough of it to sort of feed the platforms and the systems. And if things continue to move in this direction, which they will. And so what we're seeing, and actually just this week is a very good example. I think, Mark, you mentioned liquid thinking around this. If you guys look up Liquid AI, we had a very significant launch this week out of MIT. Daniela Rus, who heads CSAIL Lab, at MIT, one of her groups, spin out, really fundamentally changing the narrative a little bit around LLM and LLMs, and really sort of releasing something that addresses a few very core elements. We have to wait and see how this plays out in terms of adoption and applications and whatnot. But we've got the early signs of how potentially we can out-innovate ourselves into some of these bottlenecks or challenges that are inherent with, infrastructure challenges, regulatory challenges, responsible AI challenges. And so here in Liquid AI, we have a platform that basically is a lot more efficient. So it uses this dynamic resource allocation methodology, right? Which is allowing platforms, allowing more efficient use of compute at a very basic level. Then it has certain components around modularity and specialization. So very specifically for industries that are regulated, like healthcare, there's a real question about explainability of AI, right? And that has now been baked into a very simple function in LLMs, in Liquid AI, which allows some element of explainability. Early days, but promising directionally. And so if you look at another actually very interesting thing is like, computational costs, certainly, that's a key factor. And Liquid AI actually is able to operate at the edge, which is a very interesting model. So now imagine without having connectivity, you can use these models in fully integrated systems with hardware, software applications, whether it's robotics or electronics of any kind, where you could have that level of intelligence, right? And so I think we're on the cusp of really, in a way, out innovating on some of the bottlenecks. Now, in no way am I saying that it doesn't. I think there's certainly a place for highlighting the challenges and the dangers potentially and bad actors and all of that. But that's no different than any other narrative. I think the question, as I was thinking, listening to some of the comments, is like the algorithmic biases already, they're in different ways today. So New York Times versus Wall Street Journal and the impact is perhaps a little bit more constrained. But the algorithmic biases are baked into a lot of almost everything that we consume in different ways.
I want to piggyback off of that for a second, Shahid. I totally agree with a lot of what you just said, but also algorithmic bias at the Wall Street Journal is a little bit different because their editorial staff is more representative of the population of the US than I'd be willing to get like the people with the information rights for Liquid AI. And so I think you also have to remember that the funding for most of this is largely pale and male, and that will reinforce the algorithmic bias that's already there. With love and respect for Mark, who's pale and male, and I love to pieces.
Let the Kai weigh in on it for a moment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to point out that when we talk about algorithmic bias, it's the conversation until now, and this is something that we're trying to change, has been far too limited. Algorithmic bias so far has been focused, most of the discussion has been focused on what does the algorithm actually show us. And so, my colleague Joanna Bryson and her teammates did this paper that drew the public opinion on this, and everyone's been repeating this, that you see, for example, gender biases and age biases and race biases because that's what's in the data. I commend them for that work. At the same time, what is not being said is in all of that work is that really the most powerful insidious form of manipulation by algorithms is not in what's said, it's in what's not said. And that part is not being centered anywhere near enough in the conversation. That's why nobody even named neg information. That's the part that we're trying to draw attention to. Wall Street Journal has its own editorial biases, but that's not the same thing. And as does New York Times and everybody else. But but that's independent of the fact that the algorithms that are choosing to show you, this or that are making decisions. And to concretize that back to the example I was giving earlier, I religiously every day read New York Times and Wall Street Journal and Financial Times and Washington Post and South China Morning Post for good measure. And what is remarkable is that even if you do that, except for South China Morning Post in that mix, across that entire spectrum, what I call the algorithmic censors are still uniformly giving the same narratives.
The New York Post, though, would give you something good.
only on domestic issues.
Well, let me.
Yeah.
There's a West Coast view here too that just came. Go ahead, though, Senator. Go ahead.
I was going to say to double click on a seed stage real world example of that, which is why we need like 1,000 more Nedas in the industry, is that I have a seed stage founder that's handling all of the healthcare data for the Department of Defense. And he runs an algorithm. He's basically doing data tag. It's like AI to get your data ready for AI. He's handling much of the Department of Defense, and all of its subsidiaries are now female, and he is handling healthcare data. And I asked him how he was handling pregnancies in 2024, because if a female general is pregnant and happens to live in a state where something complicated might happen and she can't seek proper medical care, that could affect the rest of her career if he's disclosing this data up the command chain without confiding with her. And so from that single conversation from a UMass educated seed stage investor coming into his startup, which was the first woman in his entire supply chain after a Stanford education and all these other things, to push him on this part, he recomposed his entire algorithm and changed how he handled female-centric data. And so to put that in perspective of the industry, women are still 1% of all general partners across venture capital completely, which is also why I love C10, because they're also a male-female GP team, which will deeply affect their investments. And if you think of the way that had the ripple effects on the company and the entire handling of healthcare data across the Department of Defense, from someone asking a question in a thing of a startup for a relatively small check at the time, that interjection into the process is not there universally.
Actually, the other part of that,
Go ahead.
the other part is actually about the healthcare data. Historically, almost all the test subjects were white and male. So they're realizing now as they're going backwards and trying to test some more drugs and everything else, that their base data is skewed, and that they realize, African American men have twice the chance of prostate cancer as a white guy does, and things like that. They're realizing now going backwards, and what was right for men is not the right thing for women for certain things either. So there's a lot of other companies out there trying to work and go backwards now, trying to figure out how do we solve when this information we're using to build the foundation of a lot of drug testing and everything else excluded a too large of a percent of the population to start with.
Thank you so much.
I'm mindful, Sanjeev, that Nick's.
Yeah, let's keep going, guys. I want to introduce Nick, who's on the screen. He's able to join after his board meeting call. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself? Take a couple of minutes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Nick Davidoff. My wife and I have started the DVC, or Davidoff Venture Collective, 3 years ago. It's an early stage venture capital firm. We run two funds. One is an evergreen rolling fund, investing on pre-seed and seed and repeat founders in AI. And then the second one is a 75 million Series A focused fund that also invests in the companies that we backed before. We have 140 LPs in the seed fund, which are exclusively engineers and founders. This is our network that really helps us both source deals and provide value to them. The second fund is basically piggybacking of that. You might know a few of our portfolio companies. We have a portfolio of 99 AI startups as of now. So quite a sample if you want to run any research. You might know some of them, like Perplexity AI, that is getting pretty big and successful. I am super delighted to be here.
So Nick, you missed the guys, or maybe you've heard them talk before, that we're at an interesting time that's becoming even more acceleratedly, I guess, pungent of how, AI is like this adolescent that's going to be 10 times smarter than us very soon, and we're not really treating it like, we're not parenting it, and society is allowing us to go into more silos, but there is a chance if we seize this moment. But meanwhile, we're investing, right? We're deploying into the perplexities in the world. So I don't know if you wanted to comment in light of how you see the landscape. I guess you missed some of the opening of it, but
Sure. Happy to share what we see. Basically, we see the world from a weird place because we see it from the earliest stages in the application layer. We do have a few foundational companies that work on foundational models and a bunch of infra companies, and we also have one or actually two chip companies. But in the whole stack, our biggest bet is application layer because this is what we like as FDCs. This company is solving engineering challenges rather than scientific challenges. Also, what is important for us is that there's this massive number of companies that can benefit hugely from introducing AI and particular transformers into their processes, automating the work of whole departments. But that's not going to happen without somebody coming in, listening to what they actually need, how it works, and then building all of the integrations and turning this into a beautiful product. So we're betting on founders who are capable to do that. Right now, portfolios in AI seed exist in a very interesting phase. I'd probably call it a superposition between the phase of we just raised our seed and trying to tinker, and we are at escape velocity, and we are now attracting money at 150x ARR. And the change happens literally overnight. It's like the moment you look at the startup, it changes the state. We see this because basically two reasons. First is that they break through the chasm of disillusionment that prevents mass adoption, where people try a prototype and they're like, "Oh, that's magic, but it doesn't work." And then they keep working on a product and they make it better and better and better and better. And at some point they cross some threshold where it just clicks. And people are like, "Oh, I can actually get value out of it now. I want to use it." The second reason for that is that there are a lot of new markets or markets that are completely changed. Let's talk about Microsoft GitHub Copilot. It has created a new market, a new $150 million of revenue that Microsoft was not getting before, and we see the potential of it to grow like 20, 30, 50x. That's a big market. And then if we look at Devin and other autonomous engineers, we see that not only engineers can use these tools. So these markets are unoccupied. They don't have an incumbent. So whenever somebody gets to escape velocity, where they are basically the biggest player in the market, growing the fastest, people are willing to start valuating them not based on their current revenue, but based on the probability that they're gonna occupy a bigger part of the market and what's gonna be their valuation then. A lot of companies that are entering existing markets are completely redoing it. For example, we've seen a few changes. Like it's a niche market. You probably haven't even heard about it, but it's identity management. So identity management for enterprise is basically solved by it's like how does the company see you? Like, is it your user account? Can you have roles? Can you have different access? For example, for like Vodafone, you can be its employee, you can be its customer, you can be its channel partner, you can be an associate, and there are multiple roles, and you would have different access based on that. And before that, that was handled by large companies like Okta.
I have to stop you. We have about 10 more minutes and we have not gotten to the
perfect.
questions.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. So we have Ashkan and Neda as well, who have not had the chance. But I'd like to ask Ashkan, Neda, and then Nick and Sanor and Shahid in that order. about my next question, which is like, what do you think about the algorithmic bias in healthcare? Maybe we'll start with you, Ashkan.
Sure, absolutely. Great question. I think it was partially addressed in one of the other comments was that LLM and many other models that have been used is using a data that has been generated over the last 40 years in healthcare setting, mostly based on white male and from essentially Western origin. So, and now we are going to basically to the new era that we are optimizing for that specific biological portfolio. And the new drug that we are developing, new diagnostic that we are developing is optimized for that specific population, which means that AI in this new setting, increasing a disparity across different population. What we are designing, AI-enabled drug, AI-enabled target, AI-enabled diagnostic can work better for this population at the cost of false positive side effects for people from African origin, Middle Eastern origin, and even Eastern European part. So that is the main challenge that is currently exists. And we know that new data generation with for healthcare is costly, time consuming, and is not efficient. So the way that we try to address that, this is the common problem across various health sectors, essentially diagnostic and therapeutic development. And it's become more important when we do the personalized medicine. To address this, we learned a lesson from other industries. So for example, from autonomous car, from NVIDIA, even from Hollywood and essentially special effect industry, which means that they use AI to generate synthetic data. And that's essentially what we are doing in healthcare for our diagnostic. Even if we want to do, let's say, develop a new diagnostic, we do 20,000 patient studies, it might not work with many other populations. So here we use AI to generate synthetic data that essentially simulate many different populations. And then we use that data that is generated for optimizing the algorithm that we have. So again, we use AI to address algorithmic bias that has been induced by AI itself. I hope it addressed the question.
Yeah, thank you. Neda, a slightly different question to you. Given that Sanor Health uses AI pretty strongly in its 3D ultrasound for breast imaging, how do you think about leveraging AI and its variants as it goes through? Of course, AI is constantly evolving. How do you incorporate the changes into your system? I know that you're obviously going to apply for FDA approval, but talk to me about your roadmap there.
Definitely. And I want to mention, thank you for the time. I want to mention, and what Ashman was also mentioning is about the AI biases and based on what information has been available. If you look at the technologies as whole, a lot of these technologies, especially I can talk to imaging, are older technologies. The X-ray based mammography has been notorious for missing cancer detection. So now putting AI on top of a technology that had the shortcomings is just putting a lipstick on a pig. So for us, it was very important to not only address the technology first, then put an AI on the top. So with that, there is a lot of research and publication and literature that shows ultrasound picks up what X-ray misses. So we started at that point and we said, okay, we use the AI to first improve accuracy and early detection. So when you think about, a lot of time, for example, in breast cancer detection, that's what we are focused on. We can identify the signs of tumors, even in the dense breast tissue, in the areas that is difficult to analyze manually. I do acknowledge what Ashkan mentioned, that there is sometimes lack of data in that space. So for us, we need to generate data using the new imaging modalities with improved chips on the board or with improved ultrasound. In addition, it will help us to, the AI will help us to be faster and more efficient. Systems like ours will create 540 frames in every scan. 2 minutes a scan gives that many frames. So in the old days, a radiologist was used to reading 5 maximum lines of images. Now they have to see a small synalone of images. How do you help them to read these images faster and focus on what is potentially malignant or benign? But the good news is there's a lot of things that could be automated in using AI. For example, in the past, radiologists had to go one by one, annotate each of the images of what they see. What I see in a year or two is that the AI will annotate for the radiologist, and all radiologists needs to do is to accept or reject them, or annotate some other routine task, putting in margins of the tumor tissue, or highlighting where they're looking at, or sizing the measurements. I actually would argue sometimes machine will do it better than human, and makes it more cost effective, because the radiologist would spend less time on doing these tasks. Also, one other thing that we use AI for, and this is the last point that I'm going to say, is image quality. So in the past, the physical industries, or like the imaging industries, all they could do, it was to increase their channels or chips to increase the image, but now you can use AI to build the image quality. Go for
Okay,
it.
thank you. Thank you. So for the for Sanor, let me ask you this question about since you guys have funds, how do you think about the increment, like an incremental dollar coming in October 2024? How would that yield its yield differential return on investment in different aspects of the AI stack, as it were? So the applications, the LLMs, the semiconductors, data centers, whatever the case may be. How do you guys think about that? And what are your suggestions in terms of where the incremental dollar has the most return?
Invest often and everywhere. I mean, I think would be obviously, like, we've done really well with that philosophy since 2016. But Goldman Sachs did a really good analysis of the AI supply chain that I encourage everyone to read, and I can dig it out and drop it in the chat for everyone. But essentially, we're going to have to build in this direction. It's not going anywhere. It's sort of like arguing about investing in forests at the beginning of the printing press. Like, we are going to need more trees to make this happen. And so everything from processing to the minerals that go into it to the space to do it. And I would also say, so I'm sort of wearing two hats. So from a VC perspective, often and early is how we're playing those cards. From a government perspective, there has not been, and I think that this has been radically underplayed, to your point, to Kai, in the media, of there has not been this large of a governmental intervention in United States infrastructure since the 1930s, maybe. And by some accounts, CHIPS Act is bigger than that. So that is not going anywhere. So I would follow the NSF engines. I would follow the tech hubs. I would see where these chips manufacturing facilities are going, because it's an intentional part on the US government side to create innovation ecosystems across our entire landscape, instead of just where the people on this panel live. And so that will continue to grow. And so for us, it's really, and then find the intersections where it will be fruitful no matter who gets elected. I mean, we do a lot in cybersecurity. The intersection of AI and cybersecurity is not going anywhere. But I would say, depending on your own expertise, most people on this call can sniff out where the bad applications are in their industries.
Thank you. Same question to you, Shahid, and then Nick, I have a different question for you.
Sanjeev, I think Kai wants to weigh in on something.
Yeah, thanks. Like, listening with fascination to all the different things you guys are working on. One of the experiences that I've had, which drives what I've been working on, is that people don't get things until after you show them. So when I first started building the, basically the first Google Translate type system in the world in 1995, it was after 3 years of me making proposals, and I've been working with NIST and NSF and DARPA. I've done 5-6 DARPA projects. So, like, this is my world, as well as with the European Union collaboratively. The issue is that we couldn't get funding for the Google Translate work for 3 years. I started in 1992, and nobody would fund it because it wasn't something that fit into their neat boxes of stuff that they already were familiar with. And it wasn't until after we launched and it was on BBC and everything, then the funding started coming. And I think this is the same movie that I've seen many times in my 40 years of history, is that we couldn't even get our papers about using machine learning, neural networks, statistical pattern recognition for natural language processing. We couldn't even get the papers published. We had to create our own special interest group of only a couple dozen sort of rebels
How do you see
until
it
that happened.
today?
So today we're facing the same problem with the problems that I'm talking about. Everybody keeps on talking about the same old, for 7, 8 years now, algorithmic bias or 3 kinds of information disorder. And people point to how we're throwing money into it and DC is on top of these problems. And we're not even recognizing what the actual problem is. And so I think that, which is, there's a difference between algorithmic bias, and the book speaks to this, versus the cognitive bias that humans have, and how in doing systems thinking, how the way the algorithms work, not necessarily intentionally, but how they work, interacts with our unconscious psychology. And that's the part that we're not hearing in the discourse. The discourse publicly in government and so forth is still about what do we do intentionally. And there's not enough discussion of the social psychology and how that interacts with the underpinnings of democracy. And that's the conversation we're trying to drive. That's what, because we can't, I was sitting during Climate Week in a closed session in a room much like this. The guy sitting next to me worked in the Clinton administration. He's now a professor at Columbia University. And I was talking about how you can't get the politicians to do anything at a meaningful level until you shift the public opinion. And he looked at me and he told everybody in the room, Dekai is absolutely right. Like I told Bill Clinton, he means, this about climate and energy policy. And Bill just flatly said, I can't do that. The public isn't there. And so despite the fact that what he said was completely, like everybody knows that was the right thing to do now. And so this is why it's urgent for us to shift the narrative. And I just want to, I don't want to take too much time. I'm putting into the chat. I have done this before. In 2020, I led an international team of 5 doing research, but then following up with an intensive media campaign that I led that flipped first public opinion about the need to like urgently use masks to slow the spread of COVID down until we had treatments and the virus becoming less lethal. It wasn't until then that I succeeded by June 2020 that public policy flipped 180 degrees. In order to tackle these problems of the way AIs online are already shaping the way culture is going, shaping the way mindsets are going, shaping the way things are getting massively polarized, we can only get meaningful change on that if we completely change the political discourse. And this is what I'm asking for help with.
So I like when we don't violently agree with each other all the time. So I saw Marius wrote, does Nick have an opinion on what the guy is saying right now? And he says, I do.
Mark, I know we're out of time. Do you want to extend the time frame? Because we have a couple of more questions for everybody else too.
I do, but in 361 style, we definitely have a little fluidity.
Okay.
I think this would be good to hear if Nick has an interesting opinion on what the guy's saying.
See, I look at everything from the point of view of an early stage startup founder. And I don't think I, as a startup founder, should be bothered with stuff you're discussing at all. I should be bothered with making my stuff work and bring value to at least somebody so I can take my company off the ground. It is the government's job to make sure that the systems that become scaled to a large scale are not biased and are not harming the society. The government doing a horrible job at that, because instead of basically, how do you treat that? You make data universally available. As a startup founder, where do I get unbiased data? Where do I get data at all? We'll have to, jump through the loops and sign up partnerships just to get a little bit of data, and it's probably going to be biased. And then the government keeps running around and saying, these capitalists are selling your data, let's forbid them to do this. no, we do need the data to make our systems fair, not to harm the society. But as an early stage founder, I should not be bothered with that. Honestly, if I run a company and I follow all of the bullshit compliance procedures that the European Union is imposing on startups, I would never make any innovation possible. So I'm advocating
Can I-
for
All right,
startup
yep,
founders
let's
to.
let a little,
Can I
little
agree and
counter.
follow up?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with almost everything you said, Nick, which might surprise you. The European
does.
Union did not take my feedback on the AI Act, even though I gave it. In fact, there are op-eds in submission right now that criticize various aspects of the AI Act, as well as California's attempt to pass SB 1047. In fact, my op-ed went to Gavin Newsom, and I'm speaking with his AI point person. That said, I think it's very critical to differentiate between different aspects that are getting confused here. One is data. The think tank I'm on the board of, amongst others, actually are working with the Open Data Foundations. I fully agree with the point that data should be a level playing field. That said, algorithmic bias and the bias in algorithmic censorship decisions are very different from whether there's bias in the data. And that is also very different from the issues of, more broadly speaking, how it affects humans' unconscious cognitive biases.
Oh, yes.
And the word bias gets thrown around kind of haphazardly by a lot of people. And one of the things book attempts to do is to like straighten that out and to understand the relationships between all of those kinds of biases in both the machines and in the humans. So I agree with what you're saying. I do think that, that the legislation has attempted to have different tiers on the regulations so that startups that are operating under a certain threshold of number of, I think it should be number of users, are not subject to the same constraints. You know, as a lifelong tech person building AI since I was 15, the last thing I want to do is kill innovation. That actually differentiates me from a lot of the sort of people that work on AI regulation who didn't come from tech. I'm often the lone voice in the room that is trying to actually be sensible for both. And I think that part of the mission I'm working on is to, again, illuminate that discussion and bring it up from the science fiction narratives that a lot of those people working on the regulation are stuck with, which is that AI is going to take over. It's the Terminator, it's Skynet, and understand more realistically in a democracy, what are the things we need to worry about? At what scale do we need to worry about it as an early stage startup founder? And I've been through this twice, 3 times, multiple times. Certainly know where it's coming up from at an early stage tech startup. You don't want to be saddled with a lot of that. And I think that there is a way to structure that regulation, but to do that, we have to get the conversation out much more broadly at a sensible level where the general, you know, again, the regulators go to where they think the public is.
You
And
think
so,
the
like, as
market's
long as the
just gonna
public is
solve itself?
confusing biased data versus algorithmic bias versus cognitive bias of humans, the conversation gets so muddled, and we need to clarify that in order to like improve what's going on at the regulator level.
Don't you think the market's just going to solve itself by bringing more diversity of different things? Because a lot of this bias comes from RLHF, and Google
No.
employees clearly
I-
provide different RLHF.
Jennifer's got her hand
That
up.
I don't think
Oh,
so.
guys,
We've already
guys.
seen from Instagram how that doesn't happen.
Let's Jennifer chime in, Jennifer.
I think this is such a good example of how if you solve the capital stack and make the capital stack representative of the population of the United States, a lot of these problems would solve themselves. Like Nick, 1,000% I agree with you. If so many of the funded founders were not from one specific demographic. And so, like, yes, it would solve itself if the source of funding represented the population. A lot of the time, the bias will, like, the beautiful thing about bias is it works 2 ways. And so everybody has unconscious bias about themselves. And go on, Dakai, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I really want to separate 2 things. The algorithmic bias stuff, it's real. It is a problem. We work on it amongst others. That is different from the problems I'm talking about with algorithmic censorship and neg information. And I think we have to all, like, there's so much focus on a few of the problems that have received a lot of press that we're also neglecting problems that are undermining the foundations of democracy. And so I'm trying to draw attention to those problems of neg information and algorithmic censorship and the way they impinge on humans' unconscious bias. And that doesn't have anything to do with either algorithmic bias or data bias. These are two
I agree with that.
different
And the
problems.
parallel that I'm drawing is that that bias is being baked in because in a capitalistic democracy, if you don't have a distribution of financial resources that reflect the population, you're doubling down on the bias that's being baked into the system. So for your example, if there were more bilingual funders at Google, you would have funded that project sooner because the need would have been more apparent up the stack.
So Google does have bilingual. Sergey is bilingual. In fact, the reason Google 4 years after I did, Peter Norvig, the founding head of Google Research, who was my housemate and office mate, research group mate at Berkeley.
You were the co-panelist at our.
He was a co-panelist at Stanford with me.
Sorry.
Like
Answer
actually.
Nick directly. Can I jump in here?
Did I finish my point?
No.
I'm sorry, I'm going to finish my point.
Answer Nick directly.
So like they actually did understand this, but to this day, Google Translate operates at a loss.
There you go.
You ask anybody, what is the socioeconomic benefit of something like Google Translate worldwide?
I hear you. And
People
everyone
think
points to
it's
Sergey as the example
enormous,
at Google,
right?
but the board doesn't look
nobody-
like Sergey and the board sets the budget.
But nobody has figured out how to monetize it, and it's used as a loss leader to grab people's data. And that's not necessarily a healthy thing for society. So there are actually real problems like this, where a service like Google Translate, which helps tremendously in facilitating trade, socioeconomics, as well as to de-escalate conflict, because when one side understands better what's going on the other side, it leads to less misunderstandings. And even in military intelligence use, it's a good thing. But still, it's massively underfunded by just the free market. And what the problem I'm talking about now is even harder for most people to wrap their heads around because it operates at the unconscious level. And there's a lot of evidence that people, when told this, actually go into denial, right? And so it's hard to even get the public to understand this is one of the most serious problems that's confronting our society today. And so we're in a situation like I was 30 some years ago, where people it doesn't fit into a box that they're already being blasted by in the media and in the news. And so it's not getting funded, but it's existential for our societies, even more than just translation engines.
Mark, can I make a quick question? I need to jump off onto another call.
You're the only one putting your hand up, so yes, you deserve to.
Thank you. My question is regarding disinformation and the bias, algorithm bias. Is there an initiative where the consumer takes control of the algorithm? Yes, it's complicated to manufacture, it's complicated to do, but I'm sure I've read quite a bit about AI actually creating the algorithms. So the consumer himself or herself is creating the algorithm, then they should be able to search the database in accordance with their own bias, in accordance with what they are looking for.
Great question. That technology already exists. Several companies and organizations I know have already launched those things. And the problem is that people don't choose to adopt them because they don't give them the dopamine hits that they want. And two, even when people use them, they use them to support their own a priori cognitive biases. This is why I say the problem I'm bringing up is more insidious than the obvious problems out there. Because, let me give you an example. One of the many cognitive biases that's hugely counterintuitive is you would think that the more education you have, the less susceptible you are to cognitive biases. Turns out the opposite is true. the more educated people are, the more vulnerable they are to their own cognitive biases. Basically, our unconscious becomes even better at rationalizing what we want to believe and what we want to see. And there's something called the G.I. Joe fallacy, another cognitive bias, where people think that because they are aware of cognitive biases, that they are going to be better protected against their own cognitive biases. Again, the evidence is the opposite is true. And so we're up against a very hard problem here, which is why it takes a massive effort to try to bring up the level of conversation that we're having publicly.
Quickly,
Adam.
last piece of that is I do a lot of research, so it's in multiple languages, and I use Perplexity to do these, to find the links, for example. And if I had my own algorithm, then I would find the hidden stuff that is not being shown, the dopamine stuff.
Yeah, so you know, that's great. Perplexity was our friend way back in the late 80s.
No longer?
No, it still is. Again, we're in the 0.001% of people who do that. And even amongst my very highly educated AI peers, people don't realize this. So I was giving a joint keynote with Jeff Hinton earlier this year for UBS's largest event annually. And in the discussion period, you know, Jeff, who by the way, I spent my postdoc year at Toronto playing around in Jeff Hinton's lab in 1992, doing what we now call deep learning. So this was super fun for me years later to do this with Jeff, who of course just won the Nobel Prize. But he didn't start speaking about AI and the risks to humanity until last year when he stepped down from Google. This is why I've never taken the giant offers, is because I know they would silence me like they have all my colleagues. And so once he stepped down, he started talking about them, but he's sort of new to it and saying things that you've probably all heard. One of the things he said was, we have to watch out that humanity doesn't lose our autonomy to the AIs. And I said, Jeff, I'm sorry, but we lost that battle 10 to 20 years ago with the rise of AIs that make all these decisions for us on social media and recommendation engines and searches and so on. That we've already given them the power to decide what we don't think by deciding what they don't show us. And he wrote back the next day, I really enjoyed that point. That was a really strong point. So even the best and brightest among us are not seeing the level of problems caused to our unconscious because we're so unaware of our unconscious.
Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. Really.
The brightest among us do not see it. How the mortals are to address this existential problem.
Well, I think they saw it, but they weren't.
So that's this book,
articulate.
Raising AI, that's coming out, is literally written for, you know, it's in Marie Kondo style. It's a cover-to-cover, easy, conversational, casual read in a small book form. I think this is the only, and I'm now talking to, filmmakers, streaming, and we're mounting a social media campaign. This is what we're trying to raise a small amount of patronage to help support, because that's the only way, is through the media. We have to make it engaging, thought-provoking, but also entertaining, because that's the only real way to get people to change what they talk about.
Well, and the other piece that we're talking about, like immediate existential issue as AI starts to roll out all its new applications, right? There's no time to wait for somebody to read a college textbook or to get a class in the education system. We're going directly to social media. We're translating the book into little snippets that everybody here who has kids can appreciate and understand. Like, I think our kids know something's wrong on social media. That's where they're consuming their information. That's directly where we're bringing the information. And we're very grateful to be partnering with William Morris Endeavor on this and everyone inside their network. Go ahead.
It's okay. I see some questions up. We were going to move to at least two breakouts, one for this discussion and one for investing. we don't have to. I am mindful, Sanjeev, that there are two series of questions that are sort of interrelated. If people want to create a room to talk about investing, we can do that, or we can continue to talk about this subject intermixed with investing.
On investing, I just make a brief mention. Right now, we're looking for a small group of patrons. This is a much smaller raise than when I'm fundraising for one of the tech startups that I've been co-founders of. But there's a method to this madness. In 6 to 12 months, once the media communications is well underway and we are shifting the public conversation, I will be doing a real tech fundraise for the new enabling AI tech that's being developed in my university research labs, which I think has a lot of powerful, not just social impact application that I'm working on, but has a lot of useful business applications. I am reserving the best allocation for that round to people who show that they care about this right now in the patronage round.
We're trying not to pitch, but that was
sorry.
It came up to the line of pitching.
Sorry.
Okay, maybe Mikhail, Michael, but if you want to go to an investing only room, ping me and Sanjeev and we'll make it happen. But otherwise, I suggest we just continue this discussion. Well, Mikhail has his hand up. Michael Daly.
Yeah, no, couple of comments. Thank you for putting this together, and fascinating discussion and great mix of great minds. And it's good to see Dekai after meeting him at Stanford. And I just have to chime in support of a voice of reason. Sometimes the black sheep's the only one telling the truth here. And to think that profit-seeking startups are going to be mindful of people over profits is probably an unreasonable expectation. It's simply how the game is played. I get that if we had diversity of investors, we'd have a better result, but I don't see that happening in my lifetime to the extent that it would make a difference. And I see that there's immigrant investors and immigrant founders, and that's what makes it great here in America is we attract some of the best and brightest. But lastly, the one comment that government would fix this, I have to respectfully disagree. I think private enterprise is what can do the job, and to expect elected officials to be able to do anything remotely useful is pretty far-fetched. That's all.
Thanks, Michael. Now another Michael.
Yes, Michal? Okay.
Yeah.
So same like Michael, thank you. Really great conversation and high level. I agree with everything on the unconscious bias. The only problem I have, and I'll be controversial here, with the example that I'm hearing for a third time about China. And I'm asking myself, why? Is this a way of yet another manipulation of discrediting the sources that are from free world, saying, look, they have biases, whatever they're telling about us, don't trust it. Making feel people, the receivers, smaller. Oh, what do you know about China? You don't know nothing, so don't trust what you're hearing. So those two really rub me the wrong way. And yes, I'm coming from communist country. I know how are oppressive to their people, and also it doesn't matter what's the government structure if you have authoritarian regime. So it's irrelevant. We don't question who's there behind Putin, who's behind Xi Jinping, who's behind Castro or any other dictator. So this example, it really rubs me the wrong way because it sounds like Chinese propaganda, discrediting everything that's coming from the free world. This is my sentence here at the end. Caution.
So let me just respond to that. Like from a foreign policy standpoint, if you don't or let's say just playing chess, okay? If you can't figure out how the person on the other side of the chessboard is thinking, you're not going to play a good game of chess. And that's fundamentally the problem. This is not a judgment. I'm someone whose family, had to flee with the revolution in China. My clan did very badly under the Cultural Revolution. So I certainly understand what you're talking about. But lack of knowledge, there's no excuse for it.
Agree on that.
I'm not sensing an incongruence, or I think you probably have your own biases as you're interpreting this, and I
Absolutely.
I have mine.
Maybe there's an excuse because you said we're not aware of what we don't know because the algorithms are filtering it out for us.
No, I don't want to stir discussion, just a little caution. That guy, there are plenty other examples, but you're using only this one. And yes. I picked on that.
Senator made another point that that they're also not as, they're mindfully mining data in their populations. We had this discussion the other day, like how there were protests on the streets in China for the first time. It was really small, tiny. The biggest protest, I think it may have been you or someone saying, is how they view media, view longer a certain media segment, and that's how people are voting, in a way. And then you have, like, I don't know where Senator's still around. We've gone over. There's so many interesting technology. We're at war. On top of there's like a societal in the middle of like a war. So it's good and bad in so many ways. It sort of re-woke the bear, but then I'm hearing today that the bear doesn't even know what it's not even awake on certain parts of what it should be. There's other things happening that it doesn't even see. I feel like I'm even speaking Greek right now. Everybody has said that. I'm still learning.
Perfect.
So there's a lot going on here. It's 1:46. Andy Randak, you've had your hand up and down, It's back up. So
yeah, it's back up. I know we want to beat up on algorithms and the censorship and the bias along those lines. But I learned the other day that, I'm going to pull up the exact number here. Humanity creates over 400 million terabytes of data each day. If we don't have an algorithm to help us filter that, we have nothing. That we're in an avalanche, and I don't know how we can, as a society, even hope to interpret or utilize any of that data without some form of algorithms. I know that some are more ethical than others. And the other thing is regarding that consumption or production of data, according to this is Floor, the old Floor Daniels, the engineering firm, large-scale engineering firm. They will, the amount of power generation dedicated to data centers will double by 2030. Sounds like liquid AI is going to try to bring that number down. But how we solve the energy required in order to process the data we're already generating, plus the multiples of data we're going to generate in the future, is going to be a highly painful and for some very lucrative process. So I'd like to hear from people at some point, maybe in the next call, Mark, how that's reconciled.
Well, Shahid was talking about some innovation. What was the word you used? I think he dropped. We're gonna out-innovate our problems, or what was the word? And the computing on the edge.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think, Mark, strong bias for figuring things out and working our way out of this challenge of just insurmountable sort of demand for energy to feed the demand for AI across sectors, right? So, and I think we're just beginning to see some early signals that, people are thinking about this more creatively. And I'll highlight one thing, and this may be obvious to a lot of people, but maybe worth noting. Like a lot of the work, there's asymmetric information between where the industry is, where's academia, and where the general population, right? Like very different planes of existence, very different planes of information, and looking at the data of what's possible, what's not possible, and so I think as we move forward, we're seeing that some of the sectors like academia may be potentially catching up, but so far, certainly, I think the leading edge work has really been done in big tech, including obviously OpenAI and other places. So we're just seeing we have such limited insight broadly in terms of the real capabilities of what's even possible right now. But I think we do, if you were to connect the dots in terms of where the investments are going, where people are building, we're definitely placing our bets on the verticalized sort of sector-specific areas. And, the first phase, I think there's a study that was quite popular a couple of years ago from McKinsey that highlighted sort of healthcare, fintech, and sort of the first wave of industries, and the whole customer support sort of space that's already been, seeing massive shifts. But yeah, I think it's going to get more broadly accepted. But those are sort of the initial beachheads, and we've already seen a lot of applications in those areas.
I see Michael, then Nick.
So very interesting conversation. And I guess my comment, and I'll look back at my experience in cybersecurity, where for a long time folks have been claiming, we use AI, we use machine learning. Yeah, not so much. Everybody's saying AI because that's the fad. There's more to it than what we see, and there's less to it than what we see. And from an application perspective, everybody's focused on LLMs, and LLMs are a subset of AI in neural networks. And there's a lot of other interesting stuff going on. And I think the rush to LLMs, whether it's investing or using, is obscuring some of the other interesting applications and uses. And one of the things I'll say, talk about early stage investing in this space. Let's look at the large dominant tech companies today. How many of them existed 25 years ago? So for the ones that appear to be the leaders today in AI, how many of them will be around 25 years from now?
I mean, some could argue why it may not happen. It could happen in a shorter cycle now. I'm hearing people talk about it.
Actually, I think all of the major dominant tech companies existed 25 years. 25 years ago was 1999. So Google, Microsoft, Amazon,
NVIDIA.
Well, no, Google was a gleam in Sergey's eye.
Not in 1999.
Well, wasn't what it.
That's when Gmail came out.
Wasn't what it became a couple years later, but there.
But
So,
yeah, we can agree that
Nick, were you even born? Sorry.
yes, I was born in 1987, and I used a computer in 1990 the first time. That was an IBM supercomputer at a Russian nuclear super secret facility. because
Right.
my dad worked there, and my mom was sick, and they didn't know what to do with a 3-year-old, so they installed SimCity on a supercomputer, stopped their nuclear simulation for me to play it.
Equivalent of an iPad today.
Yeah, and that's yeah, it's like giving a 3-year-old an iPad. But that was pretty fun, and that basically set the trajectory for my career. Just wanted to talk a little bit about energy because we just completed a pretty good deep study of this, because we are seeing not 2x but 3.5 to 5x increase in generation and transport grid capacity, and also storage needed in the next 10 years. And there are multiple technologies that are super outdated and very prone to momentum. So first, for the future, we obviously want to see fusion work. And finally, I do not agree with Kapitsa, who said that fusion is always 30 years ago, 30 years away. It's now not that 30 years, it's closer because of AI. And there are companies that are doing so very, very little funding, 7 billion total invested in the fusion market. That's very little, nothing. Like OpenAI alone raised more than that. But they're still running outdated software. Transformers are coming, and we just invested in a foundational model that is a transformer for fusion, for basically running experiments of that. But that's still a long time ago, not within the 10 years. For 10 years, we need to build SMRs. Google just signed a partnership with Kairos Energy, which is SMRs. They had this in Google org 15 years ago. They stopped it because of Fukushima. Larry came in and said, not doing this. That's like public's gonna eat us alive. So they paused it. Now they revived it. Kairos is an ex-Googlers company, so it's still the same project going on. The time frame is 8 years. So that's the soonest we're gonna see as SMR generate energy for a Google data center is 8 years away. The shortest possible is buying old or rebuilding existing large generators, nuclear. There are roughly 1 to 1.5 gigawatts in power. That's a lot, but our incumbents need more. For example, my neighbor who runs research platform scaling at OpenAI was just looking for 10 gigawatts. And that's something they just need in some other country because they cannot find it in the US. 10 gigawatts is a lot. So energy it's a huge bottleneck, but we see a lot of 100x opportunities in the energy sector. So if you just put $1 into energy blindly, like an energy index of some sort, it's going to grow multiple times, I'm pretty sure. Well, again, not an investment advice. But if you start funding startups that use AI to optimize energy generation, transport, and storage, then there's a lot of 100x opportunities there, because it's revolutionizing the way it works in a market that's going to grow 3x in the next 10 years.
Like, I couldn't agree with you more. We should talk offline about the energy stuff that I didn't realize that you were into that. But yeah, let's talk.
Oh, yeah, well, it uses AI, so we're into that.
Well, to Michael Hammer's point, there are other things beyond LLMs. It was March or April that you presented to us in one of our deep dives. You set up a schematic, Nick, of different ways that you can invest across the stack. And
oh, yeah.
all you have to do is Google 361 firm, Nick Davidov. You probably find that Michael Hammer's got his hand back up.
Of course, you know how shy I am. So when we talk about energy
on camera, but that's a different thing.
When we talk about energy use for AI in data centers, we haven't really seen a big increase in the efficiency of AI in the use of energy for AI, right? We're still at the just throw more energy at it, build more data centers. And I would compare it with the internet. So if we go back to the 90s, servers other than the big databases, they were 4Us and they sucked a lot of power. Then they went to 2Us, then they went to 1Us, then they went to blades, right? And we haven't seen that kind of progression yet in terms of tuning the use of power and energy to drive AI. So we're in for some interesting times there.
Michael, my sense of why that is, because I've been studying the energy industry, specifically in Texas for a few months now, because I have some projects there. It's just because that's how the market would work. The energy is so inexpensive relative to the output that AI produces. So there's so much money that's flowing into it. There's no stopping it unless regulation or something else kicks in, which I highly doubt. But I think that's really the motivation for why nobody's trying to solve the energy problem in the way that you're describing, is it produce, or at least has the promise to produce so much more output, economic output, than the cost of energy or the cost of the data centers. Massive as they may be, you can think of $6 billion, $10 billion going into a data center, but the amount it produces dwarfs that in terms of economic output.
But as it bumps into competing uses for that energy.
Does. So
That's-
H100, let me give you some numbers. We just ran our internal test for NVIDIA new chipsets. So B100 versus H100. Both consume 700 watts, air-cooled. So same energy consumption. B100 for an average task performed by our portfolio company outperforms H100 by 2.5 times. So that's 2.5 more output per watt. And the price of B100 is only 25% more than H100. So, well, AI is becoming cheaper, and we can say that we get more flops per watt out of it.
But the increasing demand for AI is outstripping that performance improvement
That is true.
you're discussing.
Yes.
Yeah, we keep needing more energy. I mean, like everybody wants a Tesla and AI, right? And that requires a lot of energy.
So for example, here in Ohio, because of the data centers being built in Ohio, they're actually talking about the cost of electricity to consumers, to homeowners and whatnot, is going to be going up somewhere between 30 and 40% next year. When people start screaming about their energy bills, the politicians will be reacting.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully by building more nuclear power plants, but who am I kidding?
So Wanda's, we're hit our 2 o'clock time. Wanda, you want to make a last?
Right, I think that last comment, when Michael's comment, when politicians will hear the screaming, they will react on that, brings me to Kai's comment, which is we have to build a consensus before the legislative action can be taken. So just one very schizophrenic thought or few thoughts on that regulation and the societal will. I start with an example from the EV market. I operate in the EV market, and just today, this morning, I listened about the highlights from the Paris Auto Show, which is one of the top auto shows in the world. In the nutshell, societal views, not that they change that much, but they vacillate. They go back and forward. So right now, hybrids are in, and apparently in 2022, everyone went directly with EVs. So that societal perspective, is also the function of this feedback of the information, misinformation, whatever information we are feeding the society. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to finish on my ode to the leader with the vision. If anyone can change the world from Gandhi to Australia adopting sensible gun laws, is the vision of the leader. So just as a reminder, you probably know in Australia had a similar landscape for the firearm as the US, but after one of the massacres, the leadership, the governmental leadership, decided to take the action understanding that they will not be voted into the government again. So they decided to go for the right cause at the expense of them not being in the leadership positions. And the sensible laws were implemented, and yes, they lost the election. So I don't know if I would wait until, to Bill's credit, he also acted on Croatia and Albania because of the genocide, even though the society was not ready for that. But what I'm saying is, in this market reaction, there's a place for a leader with the vision, leader who can bring that societal perspective and maybe bring it to another side. Thank you.
You're gonna drop the mic. Just say thank you and go.
Yeah. So when you are saying that we need to wait for the consensus, that's quite depressing, because that consensus is fed by everything you just were describing.
I know, it is the most difficult challenge I've taken on in my 60 years. But I also think it's existential. So we have to do it. And it's really hard because it is a systemic problem. I don't know any single company that tries to do the right thing gets clobbered by its competitors that offer more dopamine hits. And until public values change, or there's some kind of, I'm looking at, okay, so EVs, for example. You remember the Obama administration created much more aggressive emission standards for EVs. And then the following administration during, Trump tried to roll them back. And quietly, Detroit actually went to him. The automakers went to Trump and said, please don't do that, right? Because actually, we're competing now on an aggressive but level playing field. And so not only is it helping us to do the right thing in terms of, emissions, climate change, but it's making us more competitive on the global stage against, other countries who are producing much more emissions, clean cars. And so I see the same thing happening here, is that if all of the big tech companies are playing on a level playing field and they don't have to take the heat for the regulations, what guidelines they're applying to, because all of this, the problem is all of this interacts one way or another with the First Amendment, with free speech and free media. And one of the messages is there's no getting around this. We have to understand that if we can't just ban algorithmic censorship, it is happening today already. For the last 10, 20 years, the AIs have been deciding what we don't see, right? And so we need to take the blinders off and understand this is already happening. It's not like it's something that we're trying to prevent from happening. No, it's already happening, and it's happening with no guidelines whatsoever on what the censorship criteria are. And that's something that we need to grapple with instead of continuing to pretend that it's not happening. And there's no way to address this without rethinking the First Amendment. So we need to go back to the Founding Fathers and understand, how does the AI era's algorithmic censors interact with the First Amendment? What kind of influence in shaping our society, our democracy, our culture, our mindsets, do we actually want the algorithms that are already doing that shaping?
I'm with you on that. I'm just saying, waiting for the consensus, I don't think we have time to wait for the consensus.
We don't, but we also have no other choice. I am pessimistic about this.
So, if I believe in something as the leader in the vision that will, kick that part of the society who will scream louder, perhaps, or will know how to scream and how to impact.
So we are kicking everything, right? So my media background, I'm the most important thing. He's so important. He loves the book. I love what we're doing with social media. And I think that the teenagers around today are going to resonate so loudly and so clearly with Dekai's message, which is simple. He's explaining what's happening. He's saying, hey, you know, social media doesn't have to make you believe more of what you already knew. That's not, we don't have to have algorithms like this. We don't have to have algorithms that make the adults in your life crazy. They think they know everything already. And we can have algorithms that help us be more empathetic.
Again, I agree
I
with
mean, if
everything,
I
but
was
it's
16
such a tall call for teenagers
and
to go through
guess what we can use to help us we can use design principles and we can use AI bots to spam the internet with this. And I am just telling you, if I was 16 years old, I talked to a lot of people. I talked to somebody the other day and he said, my daughter is in therapy because of social media is like one of the main things they've identified as part of her treatment. And I said, I cannot tell you how many people are in that situation. And if I have any hope, it's that the youth is going to get a hold of this and they are going to be like, yes, please. That's my optimism. So,
but the tools that are causing that problem will still be used. I mean,
they will still be used, but giving people an opportunity to say, hey, we want better from you, Instagram. We want better from you, TikTok. That's absolutely fair. And to say, no, we want more randomness in our algorithms. Let them decide.
They need to vote with their usage.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, that's how dealing with, cocaine addicts. Exactly. Yes, I know it's bad for me, but when the next cocaine is around the block, I will still take a sniff because it feels good.
And absolutely. And this, I think what's interesting about this is I think what Dekai's proposing is not a no cocaine policy. It's like how much cocaine is a good part of your diet.
Okay, wait, I did not sanction that comment.
Okay, so portions.
Let's on that note. What are we any last thoughts?
No out of context quotes.
So I want to say I'm because I've been trained scientifically rigorously as an academic to look at things that I don't want to look at. That's what makes me pessimistic. But my human nature is that of an optimist. So people ask me, what's your probability that AI is dooming humanity? I say, oh, it's 90%, but I'm optimistic. Because I think that we actually can change this if we do the right things and only a small number of people help us, we can make that change happen. The link that I sent to how I flipped public policy after flipping public opinion on masking during COVID is an example of how we can do that. I released that at the beginning of May, and by mid-June, 6 weeks later, we had flipped both. So yes, it's hard, and yes, this is going to take longer than 6 weeks, but if it takes 3 months, that's still fast enough. And I do believe we can do it.
Okay. And going around the houses, Nick, any last thoughts from you?
I don't think I can fit in the small time that we have left, but that was a very interesting conversation, very thought-provoking, and I love the arguments.
Fair enough. Bill, you came back on.
I've been working behind the avatar. Now, very wide-ranging in a way. AI reminds me a lot of blockchain, in the sense that we probably don't know what the ultimate outcomes are, but two very powerful tools.
Anyone else? Marius?
I was just writing. I really just admire that we put attention into such impactful networks like these ones, and I already saw magic happening, and I'm just having a hope that this is one of the drops into a very important ocean of thoughts, and maybe it might influence and create sensitivity for some of you.
To that point, there's a meeting about a philanthropic approach to the oceans happening in San Francisco from a confluence of serendipity. Wait for the outcome of that. Well, thank you, everybody. Another learning session for sure. More to this is catalyzed.
Thank you very much. Fascinating discussion. Thank you very much.